Divine Comedy, Theory of Evolution, Encyclopedia Britannica, Theory of Relativity, a masterpiece born in the history of human civilization, possessing mysterious and magical powers in a different world. The power of original sin, biological evolution, omniscience. As long as you read through the secret scriptures, you can gain various powers. The only thing that troubles people from other worlds is that they find it difficult to understand the language of Earth. At this moment, a library staff member came from Earth, non-Shuangwen, novel keywords. Mysterious Dominator without pop-ups, Mysterious Dominator TXT complete collection download, Mysterious Dominator latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Hardcore Crosser. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Hardcore Crosser. Rumble, a thunderous roar echoed through the rainy night. Young Simon, who was lying asleep in front of his desk, also woke up from this. Raising his head and looking around, the confusion gradually faded from the corner of his eyes, and a hint of a mixed smile appeared on his young face. Today, I got off work quite early. Before losing consciousness, I was still working on the image recording of precious mud tablets in the underground ruins in the north of Hashimaya. However, due to a sudden earthquake, the collapsed ground and soil have completely buried themselves. In theory, he is already a dead person, even if God blesses him. You should also lie in the hospital ward and slowly wake up. What is sleeping on this desk like? Dying hallucinations. Shock-induced neurological disorder. The third type of contact. Or is it about time travel? Various speculations popped out of my mind one after another. As a young person living in the 21st century, he has a strong ability to accept things. As young Simon moved his body, which felt fine, he slowly got up from his chair and looked around more carefully. A moderately sized room is old but not dirty or messy. A row of tall vertical wardrobes and dressing mirrors. A framed white oil painting. The old brown-black floor clock, with its surface peeled off, stands at the edge of the room. A patched fabric sofa. Finally, my gaze was firmly locked on the candle on the desk in front of me, more precisely at the base of its candle light. In front of the window, the uneven dim candlelight pushed the night away with difficulty. And the burnt candle wick placed on the edge of the flame made the already difficult light even more difficult. This is a candle with extremely rough workmanship. Coarse enough to make the man in front of the candlelight realize that he has truly traveled. Unlike the mass-produced items made in modern chemical factories, the candles in front of him have a cloudy and rough color, dim light, and an exceptionally prominent black smoke. The air can even smell the unique odor of animal fat burning. The most important point. It's the wick of this candle. Just like what he saw at first glance. Under the yellow flame core, there is a burnt but not fully burnt black cotton thread. It is not an improved version with 3 threads twisted together. This is very common knowledge. In the history of humanity belonging to Earth, as early as the early 19th century, the French named Chang Bachelet discovered the problem of a single candle core not burning cleanly, so he improved it into a version with 3 threads twisted together. Later, almost at the same time, French chemist Michel abandoned animal fats and switched to using chemical materials to make candles. Since then, candles in the world or on Earth have gradually abandoned ancient and outdated structures. Perhaps some remote areas still use this outdated product. But in a normal convenience store, you can never buy this kind of goods. This candle must have been made by hanging cotton thread on a wooden stick and using an ancient method of mechanical operation to continuously impregnate animal fats. It has almost completely disappeared in the 21st century. Did I catch up with the trend of time travel? After a few breaths of silence, young Simon simply pulled the candle and candlestick over and took a closer look. It's genuine. Leaning back on the chair, my gaze immediately shifted to an open notebook in front of me. Apart from the unrecognizable characters from other worlds on the left side of the page, more things are submerged by ink stains. Ink stains. When I just woke up, this note was under my control. Extending both hands, the palm print on the right hand was indeed stained with ink of the same color as the note ink stain, and a large amount of ink even spread to the center of the palm. Near the edge of the palm, a fair skin stood out from the ink. The joints are hidden and the fingers are long, without calluses, and the skin is fair and tender. It's completely different from my once rough yellow palms. Turning sideways, young Simon sat with his head tilted in the chair, reflecting his figure on the dressing mirror behind him. Slightly disheveled golden hair hangs from the ear to the shoulder, gentle and angular with the warm winter sun-like features of she, especially a pair of dark gray eyes that resemble Athena sculptures. Even a dimly lit room cannot conceal its charm. Unable to resist, he roast. Girl killer, this is it. Such a handsome appearance can receive at least 20 WeChat messages even if left on the street for an hour. This time travel is definitely the top of the line, a young and handsome face, a pair of hands that are not involved in production. I am likely to wear it on a guy who can live a comfortable life solely based on his status and status. So what should we do now? Confirm the crossing, confirm the new body, and new problems followed. The notes spread out in front of me were filled with words I had never seen before. Similarly, the language of this world itself should also be completely ignorant. Referring to this appearance and the furnishings in the room, the historical background can be largely locked in before the outbreak of human social productivity. If the cultural customs of this world can also be integrated with those of the earth, just like indoor decoration, those customs full of local characteristics will come into play. In the face of my own amnesia, if there were any bloodletting therapy, priest exorcism, or even the most unlucky barbecue wizard barbecue set meal, I would probably not be able to withstand it. Even if one wants to defend themselves, they cannot handle language barriers. With this thought in mind, the main goal of thinking shifted to the content of the notes in front of me. How good would it be if I could read the text above myself? Are the current travels so irresponsible? Without memory inheritance, system assistance, and even language proficiency, this survival difficulty is too unfriendly for ordinary people. Thinking about his difficult future, young Simon handed over his back to the chair. Subconsciously, he pressed his finger on the text in his notes and slowly scanned it with his gaze. This is a habitual gesture when reading books. Pressing the text at the end of the line of sight with fingers can create a good reading experience, even if one cannot understand the true meaning behind it. Wow, flip the pages. Although he couldn't understand the text, young Simon still started flipping through the text in front of him. In the current situation, even if he could only find some graffiti in his notes, it was better than continuing to be ignorant. Continuously flipping through, the clues obtained are not satisfactory. Although the content on the notes can be seen as alphabetical writing, it is completely different from any language he has ever known. Arabic, Greek, Syrian, Cyrillic, except for super-universal characters like O that can be seen, all other bytes do not match. Completely ignorant, completely hopeless. If you don't find anything else, your ending is almost guaranteed. Death. New books for collection and recommendation, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. Notes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Notes. Wait a minute. After flipping through a few pages of notes, I finally stopped getting nothing. Punctuations and phrases and paragraphs are things that are easily noticeable, and due to the sensitivity cultivated in daily work, young Simon distinguishes these things in his notes. Furthermore, between words and phrases. Some words that are extremely short but frequently appear in bytes are beginning to come into view. Based on their location and quantity, young Simon had an instinctive premonition. This thing. These words are very similar to short prepositions in modern English. Simply put, there are words like to, do, and of in this kind of otherworldly writing. It fits perfectly. Why is it so similar? Young Simon's gaze became serious. People who have studied different languages generally have a sensitive understanding of grammar. He, who travels around the world all year round, happens to be this kind of person. So, a bold assumption began to emerge. Is it possible for languages from other worlds to have some connection with Earth if one can travel from Earth to hear rumble? Suddenly, a powerful thunderous roar echoed directly above the mansion. At the same time, it interrupted Yang Siming's thinking. Instinctively looking out the window, his attention was immediately completely drawn away. Right in front of me, there was a detail that I hadn't noticed before. Outside the window, it's the sky on a rainy night, with lightning, thunder, and wind and rain. Although there were no strong winds blowing up heavy rain, the chaotic night wind still carried the rain and ravaged the land. However, at a distance of less than 1 meter beside him, the image that came into view was clearly contrary to common sense. There's not even a drop of rain on the window. Anyone with some common sense. It is well known that on stormy nights, rainwater will fall on the windows. It's getting more and more interesting. Young Siming couldn't help but laugh out loud when he realized that it was completely out of line with his worldview, but extremely in sync with the incident of time travel. Mysterious power, this is definitely some kind of mysterious power. In the current situation where existing means cannot solve the problem, he absolutely welcomes things that cannot be constrained by common sense. What if this is one's own way out? Young Siming immediately got up from the chair, released the window buckle, and then forcefully pushed open the window. A slightly messy rain curtain fell before my eyes, like a tangled fishing net entangled after fishing. At the same time, a gust of water-filled air blew into the room without stopping. And it's just this messy rain. As they approached the house, they were all blocked by an invisible force 2 meters away. Something invisible to the naked eye is obstructing raindrops from approaching this house. This is the real reason why there is no rain on the windows. Although scientific knowledge can be used to explain things in a biased manner, such as the wind direction caused by special environments, but at this time, it may be too far-fetched. After all, they have all traveled through time. When the guy named Reality is talking to you in declarative sentences, it's better to adapt as soon as possible. Yang Siming reached out and patted his forehead. The cold touch of his palms instantly made him wake up a lot. Young Siming is very excited. He enjoys dealing with the unknown. Over the past 30 years of his career, Young Siming has persisted in his job as a librarian. Or rather, a book collector. Although it sounds ordinary, his profession is still significantly different from that of a normal librarian. Ordinary librarians do not need to spend more than 300 days traveling around the world every year, nor do they need to master various strange and special skills. And the reason why Young Siming needs this is because of the place where he works. It is called the World Digital Library. A public welfare library that exists on the internet. His main job is to travel around the world, preserve original data records of various rare books around the world, and finally upload them to libraries for people to read. Even in the previous ongoing work, or rather, it was buried and killed by underground ruins in the northern part of Hashimaya before crossing through. Young Siming is to input precious ancient graphic and textual materials into newly discovered relics, in order to provide them for researchers or enthusiasts around the world to read. Unfortunately, he died on the spot on Earth, and his friends who have a great relationship with him must also sigh. What are you thinking about? Not wanting to let pessimistic emotions affect him, Young Siming simply extended his head out of the window and looked around. The villa on a rainy night was silent, with only candlelight illuminating a window. And on this limited light, he stood by the window, trying his best to reflect all the scenery into his eyes. Through the view from the window, he confirmed that he was currently on the second floor of this villa. Looking left and right, this villa has a total of 3 floors. The room I am in is located on the left side of the second floor, which should be a regular bedroom. It's similar to what he speculated. In a reasonable productivity environment, the previous owner of this body lived a relatively good life, at least not as worried about food and drink. Not bad. Looking around to complete the observation, young Simon nodded in satisfaction. The structural standards of the house are standardized, and there are no anomalies that can be seen at a glance inside the house. As a homeowner from a different world, it feels good. If the soul of the original owner of the body emerges and serves as a fusion material for oneself, it would be even better. After the window was opened, the outside wind naturally began to surge in. This made young Simon feel a slight chill. It's a bit cold. He quickly took 2 steps to the wardrobe and opened the door. I am currently wearing a set of white pajamas, which I should have just changed into before going to bed. For the sake of the upcoming event, he dug out a pair of pants and shirt from the wardrobe and put them on. This action brought new discoveries to young Simon. Apart from everyday clothes, the owner of the wardrobe actually preserved a set of fancy Western aristocratic costumes, full of late 20th century European court movie styles. Compared to those old furniture, this thing is definitely worth a lot. After changing his clothes, young Simon finally searched the room. The useful items were pitifully scarce, except for some scattered metal coins locked in the cabinet of the desk. Only a string of copper keys were found, and after picking them up casually, there was nothing worth noting in the room anymore. Come out of the room and take a look. This big house, take advantage of the darkness to get a clear understanding of the terrain. Being able to understand the internal structure of a house while avoiding people is definitely beneficial to oneself without causing any harm. Rumble, another thunderbolt interrupted young Simon's movements as he pushed open the door. The hand that pushed open the door froze in the air, motionless. Not right. I overlooked a very important thing myself. This book has a slight element of suspense. When encountering confusing situations, it is recommended to continue reading, or to discuss with chapter or paragraph reviews. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The clich late night plot. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The clich late night plot. The rainy night outside the window proves that there is some force interfering with the rain hitting the window. So why did this force make such interference? For deeper reasons, let's ignore the lack of information. But one thing is very clear, this mysterious force isolates rainwater outside the window, and based on the results, it is to enclose the entire mansion and achieve a certain level of isolation. At the same time, the person, or object, that triggers this phenomenon. It should be located inside the mansion. Will wandering around the mansion recklessly by oneself arouse the other party's ideas or trigger some unexpected changes? Let's take another step back. If there is something that guards this power, can you handle it on your own? Faced with an empty and secluded hallway like a secluded chamber, young Simon withdrew his toes thoughtfully and closed the door gently and carefully. Turn around. He walked back to his desk when he woke up with a clear purpose, and then picked up the note that could not be distinguished by words. Immediately, a faint murmur began to mutter to oneself. Although doing so is a bit beyond imagination, but isn't crossing itself a very incredible thing? So now, let's make a bold guess. The text on this note may be related to the world I traveled through before, and there is even a possibility that I can successfully decipher it myself. Firstly, apply the most common Latin alphabet system. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. According to grammar spacing and usage frequency, the most commonly used is E with a probability of 11.1607, followed by A with a probability of 8.4966. On short words with 2 characters between them, S and O are common occurrences. That's right, young Simon used encryption to crack the content of his notes. The text encryption method on Earth. Following closely behind, even more unbelievable things happened. It's completely consistent with his previous intuition and premonition, and this method actually works. Using Latin alphabet, the letter and word order habits of the modern English matrix, which he gradually deciphered, actually perfectly matched its grammar rules. Clear bites such as is, to, and, of have already begun to emerge. Has the writing rules of the earth been successfully applied to the writing of other worlds? If Mr. Chomsky were here, he would definitely feel that I am particularly lucky. Unable to resist, young Siming remembered a linguistic expert he had met. With a population of 7 billion on Earth, the only one who can personally translate languages from another world is probably oneself. Of course, compared to this matter, the result of translation is even more astonishing. Can it be said that this diary was written in a different shape of English rumble, bang, bang, bang? Suddenly, an unprecedented roar of thunder interrupted young Siming's work. And closely behind him was the door he had just closed. Surprisingly, someone knocked from the outside. In an instant, young Siming's neck muscles tightened and his eyes instinctively narrowed. When he looked down the hallway just now, it was still pitch black outside, and he couldn't even see a ghost. In just a few minutes, is there any movement now? Who is knocking on the door from outside now? Or, in other words, what is that thing? The situation did start to align with my own conjecture, but unfortunately it was the least desirable situation. At this moment, the other party is knocking on the door directly outside. How should you respond? It's impossible to go up and open the door in a big way, right? If there is a monster wearing a white nurse uniform with an iron triangle on its head, or a terrifying mental illness with skin peeling off and flesh leaking out from all over, then give him a shot to open the door and kill. What to do? Click, just as young Siming was pondering, something even more speechless happened to him. As a protective barrier between oneself and the pitch-black corridor, this door can be considered as the last line of defense. With a click. With a gentle twist of the door handle, it opened like this. I should have blocked the door lock just now. While young Siming felt helpless in his heart, the scene behind the door also reappeared before his eyes. However, it is somewhat different from the terrifying monsters imagined. Opening the door was a young woman dressed in black and white maid attire, holding a candlestick in her hand. As for the features, this girl is incredibly beautiful. Even though the old candlelight flickered incessantly, even though the shadows around her spread over her, even though the rough maid attire severely obscured the graceful figure of the young girl. Even so, it is difficult to conceal its breathtaking beauty. Her light golden daisy-like long hair fell softly to her hips, and her delicate features were highlighted by the blush on her face. The old-fashioned black and white maid dress added a touch of permissive love to her on the basis of this conquering appearance. What is even more deadly is the slender willow eyebrows, a pair of eyes full of autumn water, shining like stars as they gaze at young Siming. A few meters apart, I could even see my own reflection in the other person's eyes. Nostalgia. Miss Huichuan, just like that. Young Siming can be certain that even in the 21st century, before his time traveling, as he had been surfing the internet for more than 10 years, he had never seen such a level of beauty. Not to mention the current situation. Then, the girl spoke up. Young master, the thunder outside is so loud. Veronica. Veronica, her delicate tone was trembling, and fear appeared in the pitiful eyes. In front of young Siming, the girl seemed to be scared out of control by the thunder and could only come to her master's room to seek comfort. Apart from holding the candlestick with one hand, the girl also helplessly embraced her body with the other arm. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, this action also fully revealed her curvy figure. No man with a normal aesthetic can resist such temptation. Immediately, young Siming spoke up as expected. Don't be too afraid. If you don't mind, young master, I can accompany you for a while. Do you want me to answer this way? Unknown existence. At first, a color called surprise flashed through the girl's eyes. But soon, young Siming's words left her expression frozen on her face. Maintaining her puzzled gaze, the girl pondered for a moment before beginning to speak hesitantly, as if a weak animal, about her helplessness and confusion. Young master. What are you talking about? Veronica. How could Veronica be? If you want to come in and talk to me. So, rather than being scared by the thunder, I think it's more reasonable to find that the owner stayed up late at night and come to check the room. This time, young Simon directly interrupted the girl's performance, and his eyes became confident because he guessed everything was right. Your goal is to get me out of this room. That's right, isn't it? Young Simon's powerful rhetorical question did not receive a response. And the girl's gaze became even colder under his dominant tone. The dangerous aura is like a wild beast that chooses to devour people. However, in the face of such a young girl, unlike his honest physical reaction, young Simon immediately put on a hint of disdainful smile at the corner of his mouth. In the late night, the beautiful maid ran to throw herself in her arms. This kind of old bridge segment, which even science fiction writers have given up using, can still be used. Isn't it too outdated? In response, the girl who claimed to be Veronica gently lowered her head, causing her expression to completely sink into darkness. It's like being hit to the nail on the head during a confrontation, the other party doesn't say a word. Does anyone vote or bookmark it? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Cracking Errors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Cracking Errors. Ordinary people should not be able to see through my disguise. The body was completely hidden in the shadow, and the girl, who could be called Veronica, finally spoke up. She thought her appearance was perfect. The materials used for clothing matched the identity, the cutting process corresponds to the grade of handmade fabrics, and even stains have been treated for aging. Not to mention my current self, there is not even a hint of mysterious power on my body, and there are super bonus points like appearance. But actually, just met, the total time before and after does not exceed 1 breath. The man in front of him made such a definite judgment of his identity, and even spoke out with certainty. The hostile attitude is even more obvious. Even in such situations, most people face beautiful girls with the same level of performance as her. Even if one sees through, there is no reason to make such a decisive decision, right? In the bedroom, young Simon's mentality actually improved a lot. Not for anything else, just for the content spoken by this guy outside who calls himself Veronica. Although brief, this sentence definitely contains a lot of information. She lacks the ability to read the mind in fantasy novels, nor has she received modern negotiation training such as cold reading techniques. Of course, a change in mindset does not necessarily mean that vigilance can be completely relaxed. Young Simon stood up gracefully from the chair, ensuring that there was space around him to make evasive movements, before speaking again. Although you don't know the reason, you shouldn't be able to enter this room. This can be confirmed first, Miss Veronica. Repeating what was said is very interesting. Upon hearing young Simon's provocative words, the girl guarding the door's face became even worse, and her expression in the shadow seemed to have been splashed with ink. After coldly adjusting her clothes, Veronica turned her gaze to the man in the bedroom. As for whether I can enter this room. It seems that you are very concerned about this. Are you worried that I might walk in and take your life directly? Previously, I was still suffering from a natural disaster in an archaeological site, but when I woke up, I found myself in a completely unfamiliar world. Even though my mind was quite useful, there was no possibility of understanding the mysteries behind it. It's really sad, Mr. Young Simon. His haughty tone carried a hint of contempt. Just as young Simon did not answer her question, Veronica did not provide an answer and instead chose to use aggressive language to mock her. Sensing that the atmosphere in the air was getting colder and colder, young Simon raised his eyebrows. The attitude of this guy's speech implies that the other party believes that force is superior to oneself in dealing with this guy. If the enemy shows weakness, the situation will definitely be even worse. So he spoke up. I don't like others answering questions with questions. And you shouldn't have been dissatisfied because I saw through your disguise. That's why I showed such a reaction, right? Young Siming's irony is sharp enough. Unfortunately, this time the girl had no intention of continuing to respond. Haha. A meaningless sneer. She no longer maintained her previously cold demeanor. As soon as she sat down on the floor, the maid's long skirt was covered in dust, and she knelt down at the door. With a cold and lifeless gaze, she began to gaze silently at Yang Siming inside the room, not even intending to waste the blink of an eye. What was said in the pupils was clearly, I'm just here watching you, anything else is okay. We can't expect intelligence to be obtained through dialogue. Yang Siming is very clear about what to do when facing someone. Veronica's attitude of being uncooperative is basically ineffective in terms of language and other things. Not to mention my limited understanding of this guy. And the other party, even aware of their own situation before crossing over. In the case of unequal information and a gap in strength between the two parties, it would be even more difficult to pry open the mouth of this beautiful girl, than to smash open the door of the bank vault with bare hands. Of course, it does not mean that there has been no harvest at all. Firstly, the other party has confirmed the restriction of not being able to enter this room, while also confirming to a large extent that this is a non-human existence. Having these 2 points has already created quite severe prerequisites for oneself. It is quite challenging and full of dangerous prerequisites. Speaking languages that I don't understand in a different world is more practical. What is the language of the earth? Young Siming let go of the last probing sentence, but Veronica's remained unmoved and maintained her position. The girl looked like a beautiful doll sitting on the ground. Tisk. Seeing no response from the other party, Young Siming smacked his lips and sat back in his chair, continuing the unfinished deciphering work. Anyway, this guy can't get in. In the current situation, deciphering the notes in hand may be the optimal solution. On a rainy night, the atmosphere inside the house gradually became eerie. The young and beautiful maid knelt motionless at the door, her eyes fixed on the man inside, like a sculpture of Venus. And the person being watched also looked unmoved, fully focused on the text in front of them. In silence, there is a hidden crisis, and in coldness, there is a hint of glue. As the work of deciphering or translating words continued, Yang Siming's clear brain circuits began to become chaotic. He even suspected that his ideas were flawed. At first, words like to and of were still usable, but as progress progressed, the subsequent content began to become confusing. Obscure characters such as Iker and Gabara frequently appear, but there is nothing about magic or spells. Compared to a mystical notebook that records knowledge, this is more like an obscure copy that records some ancient story. As an employee of my own library, I guarantee that this thing is at least in terms of vocabulary. Rumble, another deafening thunderous roar. I don't know if it was because thunder interrupted the silence, or if the maid couldn't bear it anymore. Leaping up from the ground, without thinking of patting her dusty skirt, she directly smiled at Yang Siming, who had a strange expression and was contemplating the content of her notes, revealing a beautiful smile that was enough to illuminate the night. At this moment, the girl relied on her dazzling appearance at the door, which was not ordinary, and her previous indifference disappeared without a trace. Mr. Yang, don't you think you're wasting time? How about we openly announce and have a good exchange? As for the problem, it would be great if it could be resolved through dialogue. Seeing Veronica's sudden act of kindness, Yang Siming was immediately aroused. His first thought was not communication, but subconsciously looked at the window in front of me. If you are on the second floor, if you flip over yourself, you won't fall and become half paralyzed. A sudden change in the attitude of a malicious person usually signifies the danger that comes with it. That's right, Yang Siming's current focus is not on negotiating with the other party. but whether we can start running directly. But once you step out of this room, the problems you face are completely different. Will the maid in front of her, who cannot enter this room, pursue her with the normal human mobility, or rather, walk the stairs honestly and then make a big circle before pursuing her? I'm afraid not. If caught up by this guy, half paralyzed will probably become a luxury. And thinking deeper, does this Veronica now speaking signify a change in some situation? Simply put, with the passage of time and changes in the external environment. Is this guy about to be able to enter the house? Talking now can hold me back, it's about to break out in a while. A door less than 5 meters away. Noticing young Siming's wary silence, Veronica's smile gradually transformed into helplessness. This human is difficult to deal with. The comment management in the author's backend allows me to permanently ban myself. Sigh. I'm very curious what would happen if you press it on. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. This is a trial. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. This is a trial. Thunder roared and rain poured down heavily. The two sides were deadlocked in front of each other for less than 5 meters. At this moment, the person inside the door wants to go out, while the person outside wants to come in. But unfortunately, no one can achieve this. For young Siming, this is a major matter that concerns his life's safety. Firstly, he was buried underground in ancient ruins by an earthquake, and then encountered a special event that was difficult to calculate in terms of probability, such as crossing over, in the face of imminent death. He has only traveled for less than an hour now, and doesn't he want to die suddenly on the spot? Even if you take the experience card to the children's water park and row a boat, it won't take so little time. Even if one really wants to die, it's better to die in ancient ruins, that's at least and so on ancient ruins. A spiritual light flashed, and young Siming suddenly realized something very important. The phrase I deciphered from my notes has an unclear meaning, which is based on the judgment of modern common language. If it is related to ancient relics, the situation is quite different. As a professional with relevant knowledge, as long as you have one direction, other things can quickly be associated. Firstly, the burial site of oneself is located underground in the northern part of Hashimaya, in a plain area in the two river basins above the Eurasian continent. At the same time, it is also the land where the Babylonian civilization, one of the 4 ancient civilizations, was born. His previous job involved entering a Sumerian ruins with a history of at least 4,500 years. It was because the ruins were buried too deep that everything happened afterwards. So if we refer to the previously cracked words in this direction, Iker, literally translated as Isker, is a very meaningful name. Like the well-known Venus goddess Ishtar, Iskal is a symbol of the Sumerian faith as the god of Jupiter, with divine power directly passed down to the Creator Father. But due to the remote nature of myths, they are generally not known to people. And in Babylon and Assyria, he possessed the name Adad, which is the truly well-known god of storms, the god of Baal. Even in Canaanite mythology, he is the god who holds the power of the universe. I didn't expect this deity before, mainly because the name Iskal is too rare and rarely used in various aspects, and it is more common for Adad. It's like ordinary Chinese people know that Tai by Venus is an old fairy, but mythological researchers know a more hidden fact, that Tai by Venus was actually a beautiful fairy at the beginning. It was only with specific conditions that young Siming realized what this real name meant. Adad, or Iskal. This is a pure deity residing in heaven in mythology, possessing many powers and abilities. Even the widely circulated bull of heaven, subdued by Gilgamesh, is a manifestation of his primary power. However, the specific situation will be analyzed in detail. Since the notes are currently recording Iskal, so corresponding analysis should also be made based on this. In the Sumerian legend in which he used the name Iskal, the existence of this myth mainly possessed the power of thunder and rainstorm. The god of storms. Thunder and rainstorm. Upon reflection, Yang Siming's emotional entanglement has already been reflected in his body. In his hand, the tightly clenched palm almost deformed the important notebook. How can this make people not nervous? Does one's own journey still involve the gods in mythology? Even if we set aside the heavy rain outside the window, the details of our previous experiences are enough to demonstrate the extraordinary nature of this matter. Think about it. From awakening until now, the development of things can actually be divided into 3 distinct stages. And these 3 periods also correspond to the 3 important changes that Yang Siming actually experienced in the environment he was in. Firstly, he was awakened by a terrifying thunder in his coma, marking the first change. Secondly, he realized that after crossing over, he intended to flip through this notebook, but was interrupted by a sudden thunderous sound, and then shifted his attention to the rain curtain hidden with mysterious powers. This was the second change. Finally, when he studied the notes again and even began to gain something, the maid named Veronica outside the door knocked on the door and, accompanied by thunder, terminated the process, marking the third change. Don't you think it's too coincidental? Although it is reasonable to hear thunder on a thunderstorm night. But the magnitude of these 3 lightning strikes, the precision of their timing, and the importance of their impact. Obviously, it has exceeded the scope of reasonable. It's not like making a movie. How can this make people ignore the past? Looking up, Yang Siming's gaze at the girl outside the door had changed. I may have had some misunderstandings about this Britannica before. And realizing the change in Yang Siming's gaze, Veronica outside the door became cautious. Using her fingers to lift the edge of the maid's apron, her beautiful eyebrows became unprecedentedly solemn. What, are you planning to come out? Going out directly would be too reckless. Shaking his head, Yang Siming simply pressed his finger on the paper page of his notes, continuing to decipher the content while also sharing his own views. Firstly, the presence of thunder is likely harmless to me. Otherwise, without the sound of thunder, I wouldn't have woken up from a coma. To do something about a person, a coma state is obviously more appropriate. Then, it's the relationship between you and Lei Sheng. Considering the time of your appearance, it can be confirmed that you have no obvious hostile relationship with this note or the iskal recorded in the note. After all, if you don't want me to have some understanding of the content, then you should appear and attract my attention when the second thunder rings, so as to minimize my ability to decipher the content of the notes. Upon hearing this, the girl outside the door showed a relieved expression on her face. You finally understand. Then you should come out. Since you know I have no ill intentions. I can completely swear by Iskal's magnificent chest that this matter is absolutely all right. Yang Siming suddenly interrupted Britannica to continue releasing goodwill, while giving a deep glance outside the door. Interrupting others' thoughts without authorization is not a polite behavior. Just like you pushed the door in on your own just now. If there is no malice, it also means that there is no need to disguise oneself to make contact, let alone intervene to prevent me from cracking the notes. This is a great risk that prompts me to discover the key problem. So, why did you appear? Ms. Britannica. Britannica has truly lost her voice. The emergence of this problem directly left the maid outside the door stunned. In the moment when her fingers froze, the maid apron that had just been lifted fell loosely. Immediately after, Veronica noticed this and quickly pressed the wrinkled clothes with her hand to smooth them out. At this moment, her eyes were complex. Looking at Yang Siming, it was as if she had seen some strange person. Mr. Yang, don't you think what you're thinking is a bit outrageous? You don't have much worth it, that's enough. That's enough. Suddenly, Yang Siming loudly interrupted Veronica, with a confident tone as if he had mastered everything. From the previous conversation, I can confirm that you have a normal level of intelligence or above, as well as corresponding behavioral logic. So use this as a reference. Out of malice, you shouldn't have responded to my question to any extent, and if it was kindness, now you have reached the point of being honest or at least giving me some hints. The result is a vague statement that shifts the topic. Non-goodwill and non-malice, speaking of which, Yang Siming had completely left the chair and arrived at a place very close to the door. Bold assumptions and careful verification. When engaging in the next conversation, he must ensure that he can see any details, movements, and changes in expression of the other person. At this moment, there is almost a door separating the two. Yang Siming could almost see the trembling eyelashes on Veronica's bright eyes. This is some kind of test. Or rather, some kind of trial. And your role in it is not to monitor properly, it should have played a role similar to that of an examiner or verifier, and at the same time, it is only closely related to the god Iskal. Bang, if that's possible, just do it earlier. That concludes Yang Siming's analysis. Because just as he was about to continue speaking, the maid outside the door suddenly rushed in, and her warm body wrapped around him like a reunion of lovers. Ignoring the previous restrictions on not being able to enter the room. She's in. Immediately, in the moment when Yang Siming had no time to push away the other party. Whispers with body temperature come from the ear. Although there are still some shortcomings, you are barely qualified. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Divine Hammer of Rain and Mist. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Divine Hammer of Rain and Mist. When a woman with impeccable figure and appearance pounces on herself with an ambiguous scent. Even if most men can resist temptation, they are inevitably hesitant in the first place, which is a very normal physiological reaction. Male humans are naturally like this. However, this normal reaction is not applicable to Yang Siming at this time. Everything. It all happened too fast. Unbelievable changes begin to appear before hormones or dopamine take effect in the body. At the last moment, the whispers had not yet dissipated. The gentle body of the girl lost its original form in this instant. Colorless like air but incredibly brilliant, soft like colloid but indestructible, cold like cold ice but fiery like fire. Various contradictory factors perfectly and orderly blend together, and the indescribable existence replaces the previous Veronica in front of him. This thing it can simply meet the eerie design requirements of Party A's, colorful black. This lousy's golden finger coming. After confirming his journey, he has already made many psychological plans for himself. But such a eerie scene stuck directly to his face still prevented him from making a decisive judgment immediately. Is Veronica's changed because she has completed a certain test? So now is the time to collect the prizes. Or is it that things will enter a completely new stage next? One thing to note, this time, there was no thunder accompanying. At the same time, no matter how calmly Yang Siming thought, the experience that completely exceeded common sense continued. Accept this gift. Buzz, buzz. The last murmur of the maid echoed directly in her mind, and Yang Siming instantly lost sight. No, not just that. Including vision, the sense of touch, smell, and hearing of sounds in the body, all sensory feedback is stripped away from consciousness. Only the brain's thinking is still proceeding normally. This feeling is like being beaten by a Virgo saint. In my mind, it is the buzzing sound of wandering back and forth, like an electric motor installed in the skull, driving thinking to accelerate. Immediately afterwards, some indescribable information began to invade the brain. This special feeling is like soft silk being stuffed into the brain from the right ear and then pulled away from the left ear, and under its influence, consciousness gradually evolves. Finally, a string of lead-gray characters full of ancient flavor emerged in the brain. Yang Siming can guarantee that he has never learned this type of character before. But its meaning is inexplicably understood. 29,086, 37. This is all he can analyze and understand in this piece of information. Time passes by little, not long after, the wonderful changes that language could not describe entangled in the mind, and the mysterious yet eerie knowledge completed the transformation of thinking breadth. Yang Siming sat on the chair. The things in the mind gradually descend, and the perception of the world begins to recover. Something with a rough texture and a cold, mud-like texture appeared in his hand. It seems that my feeling has always been quite accurate. Is this my clearance reward? Looking down, just as he felt it. A dirt-brown slate, about the size of 4A paper and as thick as a chewing gum box, lay between the palm and embrace. The combination of straight lines and curved patterns almost filled the entire space of the slate. Indeed, it is a cuneiform script. This time, young Siming was more certain of his previous inference. The text on the slate belongs to the very early graphic writing. In order to work, he happened to do some basic homework on it. In Sumerian culture, it would take about 400 years for this type of graphic writing to simplify strokes and become the cuneiform script known in the Hammurabi Code. In terms of time, the slate was in response to the period of the Iskal faith. What is there to doubt when even such details are perfectly matched? Subconsciously, just like reading other words, young Siming placed his finger on this stone slab that might be called a cultural relic. Upon closer inspection, young Siming's eyebrows raised again. He can once again guarantee that he has not delved deeply into cuneiform writing in his past journey. At best, he has only conducted research within the scope of his work, and can distinguish that the period when this type of writing appeared is already the limit of his ability. But the problem is, he can actually understand the text on the slate. Are you joking? Not to mention these early graphic characters, even the later mature cuneiform characters can only recognize stars and gods like ordinary people. What is it to directly understand? Is he the reincarnation of the Umma king of Uruk? The waves in his heart did not affect young Siming's reading, and while he remained silent, the content on the slate was also understood by him. The divine hammer of rain and mist, the sky falls during the clear day, the earth separates from the edge, the name of the Son of Man has not yet been established, Anu is the sky, Chi is the earth, Bereshkigal falls into Kur, before he set sail, before father set sail, after he set sail, after the mother goddess set sail, the king of clouds, the strongest god. The light that shakes the earth throws towards the mortal world, the fierce wind blows fiercely, the mountains and fields tremble, and the earth burns, death silently shouts, the keel of the ship rolling towards it, furious light. Holy light. Rapid light. The light of destruction. Thunder of the day. The ruler of the dry sky. That Wayan is fighting against the atmosphere in Ingzi, like a lion tearing apart enemies, the dazzling radiance obscures the sun, like hyenas devouring prey. There was not much content on the small slate, and young Siming read it thoroughly in just a few minutes. Obviously, this is a poem written by ancient Sumerians praising gods. It may also be a ritual text used for worship. But no matter what, the one praising it is Sumerian god of thunder, Iskal, which is beyond doubt. Is this what is called a gift? The reward for the trial? For a moment, young Siming was somewhat surprised. He thought that according to the routine, he should have a golden finger or a natural ability to survive in a different world. But in the end, a cultural relic was delivered. Can cultural relics on Earth be valuable in a different world? Or is it to say that one's own journey is actually a return to the type of ancient Western Middle Ages, where one becomes a cultural relic dealer to make a living? Sigh. With a complex sigh in his heart, young Siming immediately set aside his distant imagination and began to consider the issue of handling the slate. The preciousness of slate is absolutely very important, and one must carry it well. But neither volume nor weight can be considered exaggerated. Carrying a stone slab like this is definitely a big problem in terms of attracting attention and hindering the activity. It must be resolved first. Sudden change and emergence. The idea was just revealed, and the slate in young Siming's hand seemed to feel his thoughts. Instantly dissipated into the air without any external influence. With this change, a lightning-like mark flashed away from young Siming's wrist. There is no trace of any slate in his hands anymore. Not even the soil residue on the slate. After hesitating for 2 breaths, Yang Siming whispered hesitantly. Come out. The slate appeared and was perfectly held in hand. Disappear. The slate disappeared, and the mark on the wrist flickered and disappeared. This is quite convenient. Quickly accepting this convenient fact, Yang Siming immediately prepared to get up from the chair. Wait. Why do I have to get up? Not right. Why am I on the chair? Yang Siming remembers very clearly. Before losing my perceptual ability, I was standing at the door of the room, interacting intimately with Veronica. Lift your head and take a look. The candle on the desk is still burning. Its length, it's exactly the same as when Yang Siming woke up for the first time. When coding today, I took away a box from the desk. Then there lay a mosquito underneath lying motionless. I thought it was dead. After I touched it, I withdrew my hand. It flew away again. The mosquito that can pretend to die is really a ghost. Will it dissipate force? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Diary. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Diary. Actually, it's not just candles. After looking around the room for a week, Yang Siming discovered the door he had opened, the room he had searched for, and even the clothes he had changed. Everything has returned to a state that has never been passive. It's like all the previous experiences were his own hallucinations. You wouldn't have changed all my clothes for me, would you? The initial shock quickly calmed down. Feeling his pajamas, Yang Siming understood. The trials he had experienced before should have been based on some kind of illusion extended from reality. This can be seen from one's own state. If someone tampers when they lose their ability to perceive the outside world, there is no need to change back their clothes. The true explanation is that one has fallen into the qualification test of Iskal clay slate, also known as the hammer of rain and mist. When one meets certain conditions, it is highly likely that, after understanding the fact of the origin of the gods, end of trial, in reality, he regained consciousness and obtained this cultural relic from the Sumerian period. And everything around naturally dissipates with the end of the illusion. This is the real world. The most prominent proof supporting this idea. It's the window not far ahead. Unlike the raindrops blocked by invisible forces in the illusion, the window in front of him at this moment was blurred by water stains. Even during the short period of time when Yang Siming looked up, there were often messy raindrops hitting the glass. You see, isn't this much more normal? Call out. Sir Ronald Adler's diary. After a long sigh of relief, Yang Siming relaxed and handed his back to the backrest of the chair, then read out the cover of the notes on the desk. The notebook in the illusion transforms into the divine hammer of rain and mist, while the notes in reality do not disappear out of thin air. Yang Siming didn't even need to move and could easily read the text on the cover of the notes at a glance. Even directly below the name of the note, there is a string of warning words that any lowly person who dares to peep will surely have their soul engulfed in endless flames, clearly used to intimidate others not to peek at this diary. It has quite a historical style. Yang Siming couldn't help but complain. Roast. This kind of warning is just as full as the dead pharaoh cursing tomb robbers. However, considering the widespread level of education in the old era and the current fantastical experiences, perhaps this warning, full of both visual and subjective feelings, could come in handy. Of course, the most important thing is still this matter: Yang Siming no longer needs to rack his brains to decipher its content. Just like he had just learned cuneiform without a teacher, he instinctively read out the characters from other worlds that he had never seen before in his notes. If there are no problems in communication, the difficulty of survival will be greatly reduced. Not to mention that this happens to be a diary. No more hesitation. Writing on the flickering candlelight, he began to read seriously. As the reading content deepened, Yang Siming's tense lips gradually relaxed. The words recorded in the diary are mostly daily trivialities or self-summaries, and occasionally a few excerpts of current affairs news or famous quotes can be seen. The handwriting full of life atmosphere is almost all related to this world and one's new identity. For him now, this is definitely the best way to disguise his identity and integrate into this world. As time passed, the rain outside the window grew heavier and heavier. Young Simon carefully read and memorized this notebook called Ronald Adler's Diary, by candlelight in the middle of the night. Just like the name of the note, its owner is a rural nobleman named Ronald Adler, who is currently nominally loyal to Queen Darren II of Greed. However, according to the knowledge of the diary owner, even before the establishment of this country, in a much longer period of time. The Adler family has lived for generations in a town on the edge of the great forest called Nahila, which is a house passed down from generation to generation. Even one of the family's ancestral teachings is to firmly guard this industry and not let the family's name decline. Queen Grey. Dandrian II. The Great Forest of New Zealand. The appearance of several nouns basically helped young Simon rule out the possibility of encountering ancient Earth. With the memory of a knowledge worker, this is not a country or place name that has ever been connected on Earth. As for the more important interpersonal relationships, Ronald's parents passed away early and there are no further distant relatives. Moreover, due to the decline of the family, even if they live in such a large mansion, there are only two maids, old and new, named Marion and Veronica, taking care of their daily lives. Britannica. Young Simon is a bit concerned about this name. Although the illusion test I just experienced evolved based on my own environment, considering that the illusion and reality perfectly match, then this Miss Veronica maid, is it really that beautiful? Forget it, let's not consider this for now. Suppressing his physiological instincts, young Simon chose not to think about this guy's situation for now. A girl who is so beautiful and works as a maid in a destitute aristocratic family, although her behavior is extremely suspicious, it is not yet the most important thing to understand. It's important to continue reading and remember these valuable contents well. Reading begins and continues, but afterwards, there were very few things worth paying attention to. There are only two things that can attract young Simon or the current Ronald Adler. One reason is that through passing travelers, it was learned that in this country called Greed, it is undergoing tremendous changes. In almost all large cities and border towns, steam-powered large ships and trains have been frequently used in various aspects. Even in the capital where the Queen resides. Springs. Recently, a novel device called streetlights has begun to be built on the roadside to provide illumination for the Queen in the dark, allowing this great monarch to appreciate his own great city. Steam engines are widely used, and even some electrical equipment is being developed and used. Seeing this, young Simon glanced thoughtfully at the desk. Right in front of me, the burning candles are telling the actual situation of this country. The aristocrats in the countryside are still using old handmade candles, while the people in the capital use electric lights. Whether on Earth or in another world, this fundamental contradiction caused by the rapid increase in productivity is indeed unavoidable. Take a look at the date written in this diary again. Although it only has a time span of a few months, considering the speed at which travelers who drive away primitive carriages to engage in commercial activities transmit messages, this is probably quite outdated news. After entering the industrial era, the speed of civilization development is definitely one of the most difficult things to estimate. Lazy countries that do not strive for progress, and miraculous countries with unreasonable development speed, are all examples in reality. Assuming you are heading to the capital of this country now, who knows what kind of city you will see? I thought it was a medieval fantasy story, but now what has become? Is it a legendary adventure during the Industrial Revolution era? Feeling speechless, young Simon shook his head and shifted his gaze to the latest content in his notes. Here, it's also the place where the ink got dirty. That is the end of the content of this note. Recently, Ronald has felt something inexplicable in the mansion and often peeks at him in the dark. He has an instinctive desire to escape, but he is not willing to live his current life. Pop. Young Simon clapped his hands absent-mindedly, put down the finished reading notebook, leaned back and collapsed on the chair. Damn it. Indeed, there was a premeditated plan. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. This is not just a tiger's head and snake's tail. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. This is not just a tiger's head and snake's tail. How to describe it? It's like when you just bought a new car and didn't even get the license plate, the insurance salesperson started calling and harassing you. Say these two things are not related, who would believe it? Also, take a look at your current situation. Traveling through different worlds, and then using the knowledge of Earth civilization to pass the test, I obtained a precious cultural relic from the same planet. This is a very thought-provoking event in itself. Not to mention the previous Ronald, who had already realized something was wrong around him before he obtained this body just now. I felt that the test and the illusion came to an abrupt end, even to the point of being a bit hesitant. But now it seems that I will probably retract this evaluation. Okay, accept your identity. Anyway, I need to change clothes again. Young Simon came to the wardrobe with some familiarity and took out the worn clothes from the wardrobe according to the previous memory. Everything was the same as in the fairyland. Change clothes and straighten the wrinkled collar. Facing the dim candlelight shining through the dressing mirror, young Simon nodded in satisfaction. Now. I am Ronald Adler. By the way, he's still a jazz. To be honest, he doesn't mind changing his name. Not only was it forced by the reality of survival, but in fact, he had already traveled to Umred in Maharashtra, India during a work to collect literature on the Peacock dynasty. At that time, the Indian who held power but spoke Hindi English and forcibly interpreted his Chinese pronunciation and name made him accept everything. Even when he came across even more eerie Scottish accent English later on, he felt there was no problem. Finally, move your hands and feet to confirm that you have no physical problems. Ronald simply picked up the candlestick from the table, then pushed open the door and strode towards the outside. There are only 2 maids at most in this house besides myself. One is Veronica, whom he has seen before, and of course he can recognize when he meets him. If you encounter someone you don't know, it will only be another maid named Marianne in your notes. If you can't even handle this situation, it's better to crash yourself into this room. Wait a minute. I was just planning to leave the house. But before his footsteps fell, Ronald stopped. After a moment of contemplation, he turned around and carried the notes from his desk into his arms before beginning his exploration of the house. In the darkness, time is passing by. Cautiously tiptoed up, Ronald's footsteps landed on the wooden floor without making a sound, like a forest ranger holding a candlelight, carefully wandering around the villa. In less than an hour, the initial inspection work had already ended in silence. The whole house, as confirmed by him in the illusion before, is divided into 3 floors. The bottom level is fully functional, with waiting rooms, reception rooms, restaurants, kitchens, and places where servants or guests reside, all located here. There are 2 locked rooms that look like warehouses, but the keys in my hand are not compatible, so I cannot confirm. The second floor is the bedroom and study where the owner's family lives, and even a dedicated music room. However, due to the fact that the Edler family only has Ronald as their only child, they are basically in a state of abandonment. In addition, there are bathrooms located in the southeast corner of the first and second floors, which are connected together by more primitive water pipes, forming a relatively decent sewage facility. As for the top 3 floors and basement, there is only a clear empty attic and a small storage room filled with debris, which is not a place to hide dirt and grime. After all, the night is not suitable for reconnaissance environments, as the candles and environment severely limit Ronald's search skills. But even so, he has already mastered enough information. A villa of this scale is not something that the original owner can build in their current economic situation. Although the walls and furniture are properly maintained, it is still easy to see the ancient history. My ancestors were wealthy and now in decline, which further confirms the content in my diary. The bookshelves in the second floor study are quite substantial, but most of them are also old. Both the latest yearbook and the oldest dictionary use the same font as Ronald's diary. With the help of that mysterious string of characters, he even briefly read the content of the books. In fact, the so-called 1-hour exploration activity. Ronald spent the most time in the study. The content recorded in the book is mostly mythological biographies, local customs, and has nothing to do with mysticism or magic. The only thing that can be related to this is perhaps just children's fairy tales that have almost been turned over. Ronald trusts his investigative skills very much. After all, he has also dealt with many problems with this skill in the past. But based on the results of this 1-hour investigation, apart from myself who had traveled through time, there was nothing related to the mysterious phenomenon in the villa, and the maids Veronica and Marianne, who were supposed to be resting, were also nowhere to be seen. This not in line with common sense. Even if she is down and out, this kind of maid serving the nobility should not disappear at night, let alone on a rainy night now. The room where the servant resides has obvious traces of life. Just experienced a mysterious event, Ronald's mind is very sensitive now. If traveling normally, he can also find a reason to explain and convince himself that the maid may have an urgent need to go out. But now be careful, when reality becomes bizarre, it often means that there is something special behind it. Based on the clues collected by oneself, assuming that one can freely speculate without thinking, there are too many possibilities that can lead to this situation. What's even worse is that none of these ideas are good. The mind is still chaotic, and the puzzle of clues is not enough to reveal the puzzle. Facing this situation, Ronald made his own decision in silence. Go out. Now is not the time to go back to the bedroom and have a big sleep. The next day, at dawn, it's time to play psychological warfare with people. Regardless, one must seize the time to obtain more information and maximize their chances of survival. With this thought in his heart, Ronald had already walked towards the door of the villa. The location of the porch is equipped with rain gear, which has been confirmed before. Abandoning the metal skeleton umbrella with strong force in thunderstorms, Ronald put on a plastic cloak and quietly pushed open the villa door. Plastic products look good. Murmuring, Ronald wanted to praise this era with plastic products. After all, in this productivity and consumption structure, having a plastic cloak is definitely a small probability of success. However, the next second, his words came to a sudden halt. The reason is very simple. Just as he walked out of the villa gate, he saw the lights in the distant town. The town was brightly lit on a thunderstorm night, extremely bright. Correspondingly, Ronald's stiff gaze beneath his eyebrows and the twitching corners of his mouth on his face. This is not a somewhat interesting level. Can a master with outstanding computing power tell me how many people should light up an entire town with primitive candles? Especially this is a damn rainy night. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Forgive not to accompany. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Forgive not to accompany. Let's go. We have to go. Immediately leave. The thriving night town in front of him, no matter how interesting the scenery is, cannot stop Ronald from turning his head and leaving now. Follow the nearby road and leave this damn place as soon as possible. Ronald remembers very clearly that when he first woke up, he was wearing pajamas and the candles on his desk had already been partially burned. Including the time spent exploring the villa, it was at least late at night now. At this point in time, throughout Western history, there is no holiday that can be celebrated on a thunderstorm night, making the entire town brightly lit. This is a remote town without even a factory chimney that emits smoke. Considering the vicious cycle under the economic crushing effect, the standard of living of ordinary residents can be imagined. So late at night. A large number of candles were lit together in the entire town, along with the eerie brightness. Absolutely an incomprehensible strange event. The best outcome is that some black and evil forces have taken control of the small town and are currently engaging in activities that are not very friendly to their local aristocrat. The worst-case scenario is that the entire town is having problems. Including every plant, every tree, every insect, every flower, and even everyone. Referring to the missing maid in the villa, as well as being able to obtain this body, hehe. What was the decision made earlier? Continuing to explore. Don't be joking. Ronald is not brainwashed by Western superhero movies, he dares to rush forward and act recklessly in the face of things of this scale. If you have relevant information and a clear understanding of the cause and process of things, you can still consider it. Now with a hint of darkness in both eyes, one can tell that the opposite side is abnormal. What should we do? When I first faced the maid, I didn't seem flustered on the surface, but in reality, frequent psychological confrontations consumed a lot of mental energy. Now that I'm still working on myself with high intensity, okay, if you don't play cards according to common sense, come up and play some monsters and monsters. Don't blame me for running away. Although evasion may be shameful, it can sometimes be effective. Carrying the lamp he found casually, Ronald pushed the door open and fled towards the direction far away from the town. I have some knowledge about surviving in the wild, at least I can sustain it for a while. Just a few steps away, Ronald realized something was wrong with him. Surrounded by the sound of rapid and dense raindrops. But the rain gear I was wearing didn't have any feeling of raindrops hitting me. Extend your hand to front of you, under the light of the lamp. Ronald discovered astonishing facts. Although the rain curtain around still falls on its own, these raindrops automatically slide to the side when they are about to reach or touch its surface. Not only Ronald himself. Even his clothes were thus protected from the erosion of rainwater. Is it the divine hammer of rain and mist? Only this explanation is the most reasonable. Just like in the previous illusion, the house was isolated from rainwater, and after obtaining this stone slab, it also demonstrated that it could bring benefits. Don't take an umbrella on rainy days. Still following the same approach as when the slate was discovered to be hidden, Ronald attempted to manipulate the hammer of rain and mist as he advanced. No need to recite any tedious spells, nor do you need any casting materials or gestures. As long as the divine hammer of rain and mist is in one's own hands, whether it is hidden or not. With a single thought, the ability to automatically avoid rainwater can be activated and turned off. Take oneself as the center and manipulate freely within 20 meters. However, this ability can only prevent the invasion of rainwater, and it is absolutely impossible to control rainwater operations. It's pretty good. Nodding in satisfaction, Ronald was very satisfied with his ability to avoid the rain. Despite the heavy rain, the young man hurried along the main road by the forest, holding a protected lamp in his hand. On a rainy night without moonlight illumination, this light slowly moves forward in the cracks of the rain. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ronald observed the surrounding scenery through the light. The road he is walking on now is sandwiched between farmland and forests, the main road connecting the town with the outside world. The farmland is filled with plants similar to wheat, which gradually disappear after leaving the town for a period of time. The trees not far from the roadside are mostly broad-leaved plants with broad leaf surfaces. It is often seen that under the ravages of raindrops, the yellowed leaves fall on the ground and become patches of color. If this place is similar to Earth, or if one is also stepping on a planet, then one is likely to be in a temperate zone with distinct 4 seasons, and the time should be in mid-autumn. Because deciduous broad-leaved plants usually occur during temperate winter or when the climate becomes hot and dry, combined with sensory temperature and a sniff of the cold wind at the nose, this can be understood. Keep moving forward. Realizing his situation in his heart, Ronald continued to move forward in the rainy night. Perhaps something is protecting him in the dark, or maybe it's because his luck is really good at this moment. After continuing for about 4 kilometers, he found wool marks on the left side of the muddy road. It's a thunderstorm now. This kind of weather has always been favored by creators of various murders, because heavy rain can wash away almost 90% of the traces left on the earth, leaving those who are pursuing clues helpless. There are basically only 2 possibilities for leaving wool marks in thunderstorms. 1. There is a convoy passing by ahead, and it has only recently left. The rain has yet to erase its traces. 2. The goods loaded on the truck were extremely heavy, so the imprint was deep enough not to be washed away by the rain. Ronald didn't even need to look down and carefully understand that the situation was the second one. The reason is also very simple. In this era of drastic social changes, it is usually not young people with adventurous spirits who choose to do business, but rather old merchants who have become accustomed to this industry and are even about to retire, so they are unwilling to change. How could experienced merchants rush through the rain on such a stormy night? This is inevitably due to the extremely heavy weight of the goods, and fresh yellow fallen leaves can occasionally cover some of the marks, indicating that they have been away for quite some time. Catch up and find them. Not far ahead, there is a convoy that has stopped due to the rain. As for the other party's attitude, that's a question that only needs to be considered after catching up. The decision was made, and Ronald's footsteps immediately quickened again, firmly following the traces on the ground. The still obvious wheel marks became increasingly clear as he moved forward, which also deepened his speculation in his heart. At the same time, the rainwater that had originally avoided Ronald began to hit the rain gear. He voluntarily shut down his new abilities. 15 minutes later, by the edge of the forest shrouded in dark brown rain, the wheel marks on the ground disappeared from the roadside. Not far from the main road, a convoy was quietly parked in the open space, as if also falling into a deep sleep on a rainy night. Just at such a distance, Ronald could also see the campfire protected by the curtain, with 3 or 2 members of the convoy responsible for guarding the night watching around, some of whom were boiling water with water cups hanging from the fire. Although the opening tonight was not very good, the subsequent development is still quite good. A few humans are responsible for the night watch convoy, which is exactly what he is looking for. Without any hesitation, Ronald also left the main road and walked towards the convoy. What allowed him to act with such peace of mind was actually because he saw the components of the team. There are only 4 carriages loaded with goods in the camp, and the carriages have different shapes and types of goods. Even the clothes of the night watchmen are divided, with significant differences in dressing habits. From this, the conclusion naturally comes to the following. This is a temporary team, and its members are not fixed partners. A temporary team like this, under the mutual restraint of people in a small society, basically no one will have malicious intentions towards themselves, and the mutual restraint of the other party is their best protective umbrella. That's really satisfying. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. How to negotiate with people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. How to negotiate with people. Soon, the night watchman of the convoy also noticed Ronald's arrival. The 2 who were awake from the 3 vigils on the other side of the fire called out the one who was dozing off, and then the 3 stood up together. However, afterwards, apart from keeping their eyes on Ronald's side, they stopped. 3 people were stuck in place, and after exchanging a few words, they even argued about something. Very good, it's really becoming more and more in line with my heart. Although it was difficult to hear the conversation on the other side clearly on a rainy night, Rodner could still see through the movements of these people at a glance. Simple physical work, 1 sentence at a time, is not considered a heated argument. As the team's night watchmen, they are clearly discussing their identity and how to respond. It takes a lot of effort to decide such simple questions, and it's not easy to handle them with one's own eloquence. Based on his proficiency in language, he whispered a few words in local dialect. Immediately, a confident curve appeared at the corner of his mouth as he approached the 3 of them. "Excuse me, 3 of you." Watching the people on their guard come here, these 3 guys finally gave up their meaningless argument. Soon, the person with the strongest physique took the initiative to step forward. "What do you do, you?" "I apologize for disturbing everyone's rest." In order to prevent unnecessary misunderstandings from the other party, Ronald raised his hand and flicked the brim of his cloak to confirm that the other party could see the goodwill on his face. Only then did he bend down slightly to apologize. I came out of the town behind me and wanted to go to the neighboring town to do some private business. Because I remember a convoy passing by during the day, I was wondering if I could catch up with you on a rainy day so that I could take you on a journey. The matter is so simple, please forgive me, gentlemen." After listening to Ronald's words, the three of them immediately began to discuss in a low voice. "Look at this guy with fair skin, he seems to be a nobleman. How could nobles go out on their own in this weather? I think it's the result of the cold rain. Besides, can you see this little light clearly? But he speaks with great elegance, he looks like an old master at first glance. So what do you say we should do? It's not like driving them back directly, is it? What are we night watchers doing? It's better not to cause trouble and let him go home. It makes sense. That's it." After whispering, the man who had just started questioning Ronald spoke again, and this time with the support of his companions. His confidence in speaking was also much stronger. "Sir, we are just a temporary team and cannot agree to the requests of people of unknown origin at such a time. In order for neither of us to have any unpleasant things, please go back. After all, the town is not far away, so renting a car at dawn is not a problem, right?" Perhaps I noticed Ronald's wording, and this guy adjusted his address after speaking, but these were still expected reactions. The way of thinking of ordinary people. This classic refusal language is really easy to deal with. Lowering his eyebrows, Ronald's sincere tone also carried a hint of request. "Three of you, What's going on here?" Suddenly, a temporary tent erected on the carriage opened a gap, and Ronald's words were interrupted by the man's shout. Ronald could see clearly that this was the carriage with the wheel imprint pressed out. After taking a breath, the person on the carriage noticed through the crack that the number of night watchmen had increased from 3 to 4, and immediately reacted. "What's going on? Aren't you 3 people on the night watch?" One of the 3 night watchmen immediately ran over. "Mr. Nisos, this guy said he's from the small town behind him and wants a ride with us." "Oh." Upon hearing such an answer, the carriage responded and immediately fell into silence. It didn't make people wait long. A few seconds later, the people inside sorted their clothes and jumped out of the tent, then took a step towards Ronald. This is a healthy man of moderate stature, not over 35 years old, with a prominent set of slightly curled blonde hair and a trimmed beard. At this moment, I was simply wearing ordinary fabric clothes, but it didn't look messy either. He should be an experienced merchant. Ronald immediately made a judgment. Besides tidying up his appearance to a certain extent, the other party's ability to quickly emerge from the carriage indicates that he is sleeping in his clothes and his vigilance is definitely not low. When Ronald looked at the merchant, the other person also looked at Ronald's face under his raincoat with emerald green eyes that had just woken up from his sleep. As soon as he saw Ronald's appearance, the man was surprised and asked, "Are you a nobleman from the previous town?" "Sir Ronald." That's right, he recognized Ronald. "Ronald Adler. Nice to meet you." Nodding slightly, a calm smile also appeared at the corner of my mouth. With a relaxed tone, Ronald admitted his identity and began to contemplate the next steps. Unlike those 3 silly night watchmen, this guy who walked out of the carriage is not that easy to deal with just by looking at his appearance. A meticulously groomed beard is meant to leave a good impression when talking to people, while ordinary clothing is a product of economic constraints. Coupled with a carriage exclusively for one person and an attitude when talking to the night watchman, Ronald's mind quickly draws conclusions. This is a merchant with an average economic situation and travels around the world. The frugal attire does not affect his appearance, indicating that this person understands the influence of external appearance but also manages the household carefully. Proactively coming out to check the situation means that he likes to have the situation in his hands. A shrewd businessman who is cautious and enjoys taking the initiative. As a team builder and one of the masters of decision-making power, I must treat this guy carefully. A simple analysis of the background of travel merchants and corresponding conversation strategies are also carried out along with the first exploration. If I remember correctly, I used to call him Nisos by night. Watched. The sincerity in Ronald's eyes remained undiminished, and his tone carried a friendly and serious tone. Mr. Nisos, as a knowledgeable businessman, you must have heard some news when you stayed in my town before. I came out in a hurry and didn't carry too many coins with me. But if willing to provide assistance, this money can be paid as a deposit. During his speech, Ronald had already pulled out all the coins except for 3 silver coins from his pocket, expressing his sincere words with this gesture. According to the actual situation, his country is still heavily using graded metal currencies, and based on the general value of precious metals and the actual social situation, it is estimated that serving as a deposit is barely enough. Is there a deposit? Although Ronald's words were muttering, the merchant named Nisos didn't pay much attention to those coins. On the contrary, he pretended to observe the coinage and looked up at the palm of his hand holding the coin in front of him. At this moment, the attitude of the merchants underwent a 180-degree transformation. Through his experience of walking outside, he knew that this person was a down-to-earth aristocrat. Although coins are only low-value copper coins, this palm is very interesting. There is no visible calluses on the tiger's mouth and palm, with 10 fair and slender fingers, only a small amount of dirt stained on rainy nights. Especially nails. 10 fingers are neatly trimmed, which is something that ordinary people or bandits would not even consider. Looking at their appearance through the bonfire, the person in front of them is likely not lying. So standing in front of him was the aristocrat Ronald Adler, who had passed by and lived in the small town before. So the so-called news in the other party's mouth got it. With a blink of an eye, Nisos recalled the news he had heard earlier in the town. Although the aristocrats living in the town had a wealthy family, they are now in decline. In such a rainy night, rushing to the neighboring town, the coins in hand also exuded a sense of poverty. The reason why the other party appeared here is likely due to economic issues. The purpose is to salvage the difficult family situation. The nobles in front of them, for the sake of face, are going to the neighboring town on a rainy night to do some inconvenient things on weekdays. Having his own estimate of the situation, the merchant quickly waved his hand. So it's Mr. Ronald. When I passed by the town before, I heard about your good name. I also wanted to find an opportunity to visit you, but I was busy with trivial matters and couldn't achieve my wish. It's truly the Queen's blessing to meet here now. And how can I charge a fee for helping a gentleman? While being polite, Nisos also took the initiative to bow and gave way to enter the carriage circle. If you don't mind, you can come to my tent and rest together. This rainy day is not a comfortable day. There was no hint of hesitation on his face, and Ronald immediately nodded and followed suit. Thank you very much then. Following the enthusiastic Nisos onto the carriage, he was already certain of his good luck. The key to interacting with people is often not in terms of language, but rather in terms of approach. Sometimes, even smarter people are not impossible to deal with. In the brief conversation just now, Ronald hinted at his predicament in a more tactful way, only providing a small amount of coins to support this suggestion, without directly pointing out any clear reasons during the process. In this way, the imaginative space reserved in the words is cleverly filled by the merchants themselves. Poor aristocrats, driving alone on a rainy night, go to the neighboring town. Smart people often like to analyze situations on their own, while those with a strong desire for control will actively provide opinions. In this way, Nisos was invisibly guided by Ronald's thinking. What he thought for himself was actually what Ronald wanted him to think about. Once guidance is successful, the next steps will be simple. Usually, people do not doubt themselves. This is the truth inferred by oneself. There is nothing more persuasive in this world, whether in conversation or debate, than using the reasons given by the person in front of them. Afterwards, shrewd merchants naturally did not mind forming a good relationship with a local nobleman. The desire for control will also encourage him to actively propose opinions from his peers. It is entirely natural for Ronald to accept kindness himself. Communicating with humans is really great. Compared to the troubles faced by the soft and hard Veronica before, this is the benefit that choosing the right way to communicate with people can bring. And with the exchange of pulling out coins, Ronald specifically observed the other person's gaze when they saw his belongings. Without any waves. This small detail can provide 3 pieces of information for oneself. Firstly, the value of coins minted in one's own hands will not be too high, otherwise the merchant will not be unresponsive, and if one plans to make a living on their own in the future, they will have to find ways to make money. Secondly, Mr. Nisos is not short of this small amount of money and will not do anything irrational in the short term. Thirdly, Nisos still maintains this attitude towards a wealthy aristocrat, and Ronald thus confirms the identity of the world's aristocratic class. Even if you don't have money, you're in dire straits. But the status of nobility is still something that ordinary people need to envy, or at least envy. The means used by the ruling class in this world or region to manipulate the people are fully reflected in this point. Bloodline supremacy. Overall, Ronald is quite satisfied with his experience during this period. Leaving safely from the mansion and the eerie town, and then finding a place to stay within a limited time, I even gained more useful information through brief communication. In the following journey, my dietary issues can also be solved in the caravan. Perfect. Great. I'm quite happy to see that the signing site has become shorter. It would be even better to add 1,000 words to this chapter tonight. End of this chapter.